Welcome back to the deep dive. We're going to get straight into it today, into, I think, one of the most intense and difficult global conversations happening right now.
It really is.
The conflict that followed the October 7th, 2023 Hamas assault on Israel is just agonizingly complex. But for so many, the debate really centers on the religious justification.
Right, because Hamas explicitly invoked classical Islamic doctrines. They used the term jihād to justify their actions.
And those actions included the massacre of civilians, documented sexual violence, mutilation, and, of course, mass hostage-taking.
And when a group makes such a profound claim to religious legitimacy for acts like that, it demands a really rigorous, impartial, scholarly review.
So that's our mission for you today. We are not here to debate politics or weigh conflicting national narratives.
No, we're using a very specific framework. We're looking at classical Islamic jurisprudence, or Fiqh, to assess the conduct of the attackers against the faith's own established law of war.
For this deep dive, we've really built our analysis on the work of leading academic authorities. People like Ahmed Al-Dawoody, Karima Bennoune, Nesrine Badawi.
And these are scholars who've gone directly into the pre-modern legal texts, into what's known as CR, the Islamist law of war, to see if these actions actually meet the standards Hamas claims to uphold.
We're going to look at this from two angles, right?
Exactly. Two critical legal dimensions. First, you have jus ad bellum.
Which is the right to wage war in the first place.
Right. And second, jus in bello, which is all about the proper conduct within that war.
And for any military action to be considered permissible under Islamic law, both of these have to be satisfied.
Both have to be met. It's not one or the other.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we should start with the foundations. Because what really surprised me in the research was how much Islamic law already contains principles we think of as, well, modern.
It's this fascinating idea of convergence. Al-Dawoody's work really shows you that modern international humanitarian law, IHL, it's not some external concept being forced onto these traditions.
So what's an example of that? How do they converge?
Well, take the core principles we rely on today in IHL.
Yeah.
Things like distinction, proportionality, taking precautions.
Right.
These ideas are echoed, deeply in the debates of pre-modern Muslim jurists. Distinction, the absolute need to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, that was a central concern.
And the timeline here is it's staggering. Bennoune's scholarship shows that Islamic law established these robust civilian protections more than a millennium before the Geneva Conventions were even thought of.
1,000 years. Think about that.
Yeah.
1,000 years of legal tradition already carving out non-combatants, women, children, the elderly, clergy, as a separate category that is entitled to immunity from attack.
So that's basically the foundation for our modern concept of the civilian.
It's right there in the tradition.
Okay, so that historical grounding is crucial. But it brings up a huge question about interpretation. If the tradition is so clear on protecting civilians, how on earth do groups like Hamas use the exact same sources to justify mass violence against them?
And this is where we, and you, the listener, have to apply what Badawi calls critical comparativism. Meaning you have to remember that both the militant groups and the mainstream Muslim scholars who denounce them are all claiming to base their arguments on the original Islamic sources.
So you can't just take their claim of being authentic at face value. You have to look at what they're actually arguing.
Precisely. You have to look at the substance. And Bennoune helps frame this. She defines this kind of fundamentalism, not just as a religious movement, but as an extreme right movement that achieves political aims by manipulating religion.
A political manipulation.
Yes, and it often requires what she calls double discourse. You invoke the authority of religion, you cherry-pick a verse here or there, while you're actually pursuing intensely political secular goals.
That sets the stage perfectly. So let's apply that critical framework to the first major test. Just ad bellum. The right to wage war, to put it plainly. Was jihad even permissible in the first place for this attack, according to the classical sources?
Al-Dawoody's thesis here is unambiguous. Jihad, in the sense of an international armed conflict, is overwhelmingly defined as a defensive war.
Defensive only?
Yes. Justified only when Muslims face aggression, or what the sources call fitna, severe persecution. It is not, historically or legally, a blank check for aggressive warfare.
And this isn't just an interpretation, it's rooted right in the Quran itself.
It is. Verse 2.190 is key. It conditions the permission to fight on engaging those who fight with you and do not exceed the limits.
Those who fight with you, that's very specific.
It's conditional. It establishes warfare as reactive. It puts the burden of proof on the attacker to show they were the victim of aggression first.
Okay, but that leads to, a huge authority problem. Even if you could argue a state of aggression existed, who actually has the right to declare jihad?
And that is the crucial point. Classical jurists universally treated jihad as an obligation of the Muslim ruler, the imam. It was a state function. It required governmental sanction.
So it's not something an individual or a group can just decide to do on their own?
Absolutely not. It had to be a centralized authority, a ruler who could assess the situation, manage the resources, and critically ensure compliance with the rules of war.
And Hamas, as a non-state armed group, operating outside the sanction of any recognized Muslim state authority.
They fundamentally lack the classical authority to declare or prosecute a legitimate jihad. It's a non-starter.
So if that authority is missing, what would classical jurists even call this kind of action?
Well, they wouldn't call it jihad. They'd classify it as something far more serious, far more criminal.
Which is?
Armed action without the ruler's permission, especially involving this level of violence, would be categorized as iraba, which is brigandage, or highway robbery, or fasad fayalar.
Corruption in the land.
Yes, mischief and corruption in the land. These are serious crimes in Islamic law, not divinely sanctioned warfare.
So from the perspective of the legal framework they claim to follow, their action is illegitimate before the first shot is even fired.
That's the key takeaway from the Jus ad bellum test. The authority is absent.
But let's push this further. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they somehow cleared that hurdle of authority. The bigger issue for most people is the actions themselves.
Of course.
The sheer horror of what happened on October 7th, targeting civilians, the mutilation, the sexual violence, this moves beyond legal authority into just, fundamental religious adherence.
And this brings us to jus in bello, the conduct in war.
Right.
And on this, the classical sources aren't just restrictive. They are absolutely, unequivocally categorical.
How so?
The law makes it, to use Al-Dawoody's phrase, abundantly clear that fighting must be directed solely against enemy combatants. That principle of distinction is non-negotiable.
What are some of the specific prohibitions that the earliest sources lay down?
They're incredibly specific. The Prophet Muhammad himself explicitly prohibited targeting women, children, the elderly, clergy, and anyone not actively participating in the fighting. These are the foundational protected categories.
And it wasn't just a one-off instruction. We see it being institutionalized immediately after.
Exactly. Look at the commands from the first caliph, Abu Bakr, to his army. He ordered them, do not commit treachery, do not mutilate, neither kill a child or aged man or woman, do not cut down fruit-bearing trees.
And when you look at the documented abuses of October 7th,
the deliberate targeting of non-combatants, the reports of mutilation, the sheer destruction of life, these are direct violations of those ancient foundational commands. They are textbook examples of un-Islamic conduct.
The victims, the women, the children, the elderly, the foreign workers, people at a music festival, they all fall squarely within those protected categories.
Absolutely. And later jurists extended those protections even further to farmers, traders, craftsmen. Basically, anyone not holding a weapon is protected. There's just no ambiguity on this point.
So this brings us to an argument you always hear in these situations, retaliation. The idea that, the enemy does it to us, so we can do it to them. Does Islamic law permit retaliation against civilians?
And that's a critical point of theology. The answer is a resounding absolute
no exceptions.
None. The Islamic rules of war are binding on the Muslim soldier regardless of the enemy's conduct. Compliance is a theological act. It's considered an act of worship.
An act of worship, so it's not a reciprocal deal that you can just suspend if the other side breaks the rules.
Exactly. The moral obligation is to God, not to the enemy. So the argument that Israeli actions, however one judges them, could ever justify Hamas's retaliation against civilians is completely nullified by the theological basis of CR.
Okay, let's talk about the hostage-taking. This was a huge part of the attack. Seizing civilians, children, elderly people for political leverage.
Classical Islamic law always required humane treatment towards the prisoners. The jurists debated what to do with captured combatants, whether to release them, ransom them, but humane treatment was a constant.
But what about taking non-combatant hostages?
Badawi points out that this specific tactic seizing civilians for political leverage is a modern tactical innovation. It finds no support, none, in classical law.
And abuse of captives. Torture.
It was simply inconceivable in that framework. There's a famous story of Imam Malik, one of the greatest jurists, being asked about torturing prisoners. His response was just, "I have not heard of that."
Wow.
It's a response that shows how deeply alien the concept was. So the seizure and abuse of women, children, and the elderly for political aims is completely and totally outside the bounds of Islamic jus in bello.
So let's bring this all to a head. We have two massive failures here. First, the lack of legitimate authority under jus in bellum.
A complete failure on that front.
And then the spectacular, horrific failure to adhere to the core principles of conduct under jus in bello.
And the conclusion from the scholars we've been looking at is definitive.
Yeah.
As Bennoune puts it, once those humanitarian precepts are violated, the targeting of women and children, the mutilation, the conflict, no longer qualified as permissible warfare because it was no longer Islamic.
It stops being Islamic at that point.
It ceases to be, according to its own rules.
So is this just an academic argument, or do we see this reflected by mainstream religious authorities today?
Oh, it's been thoroughly echoed. Major Islamic institutions around the world have not endorsed this conduct. You see an overwhelming scholarly consensus that jihad has to be bounded by law. It's not a blank check for slaughter.
Can you point to anything specific?
Sure. Look at documents like the Amman Message, signed by hundreds of top scholars, or statements from institutions like Al-Azhar in Cairo. They all affirm that non-combatants are not legitimate targets.
So Hamas's claims are really a fringe, politically motivated interpretation that the scholarly majority rejects.
Absolutely. And it just reinforces Bennoune's point. Hamas is actively betweening the authentic Islamic tradition. They are engaging in the political manipulation of religion by cherry-picking texts while ignoring the vast body of law that constrains violence.
And for you, the listener, the implication here is pretty profound. When the international community talks about IHL compliance in Muslim contexts, it's not about imposing foreign Western values.
Not at all. It's actually promoting the revival of neglected principles within the Islamic tradition itself. Principles of civilian immunity that have been there for a millennium.
So to wrap this up, our deep dive really shows that Hamas's claims to Islamic legitimacy completely fail when judged by their own jurisprudential standards.
They do. The historical consensus against targeting civilians, against mutilation, against this kind of destruction of life is just clear and unequivocal in the classical sources. It makes the conduct not only illegal under IHL, but impermissible under the very law they claim to be championing.
And that theological basis leaves us with a powerful point to think on.
It does. Remember, these rules protecting civilians, treating prisoners humanely, they're based on divine commands. They're considered inviolable norms, acts of worship. So think about this. If Islamic law's humanitarian obligations are grounded in a theological command, not just reciprocity or politics, what does that really imply?
What does it imply about the future?
It implies a potential for truly robust interfaith dialogue, for lasting humanitarian protections that can transcend political divides. It's a moral standard that demands to be met no matter what the enemy does.